That dinner felt like any other clinking cutlery, overlapping conversations, the usual rhythm of a family gathering. But when my cousin leaned back in her chair and casually remarked, "You must be struggling since you came back," it cut through the noise sharper than any knife on the table. She laughed lightly after saying it, as if softening the jab would make it harmless. It wasn't the words alone, it was the tone. That faint edge of pity laced with quiet smugness, the kind that only comes from someone convinced. "They already know your story." In her mind, I'd returned home defeated, my time abroad reduced to a failed chapter I'd rather not talk about. I didn't argue. I didn't correct her. I let the smile linger, nodding just enough to move the conversation along. There was no need to explain myself to someone so certain of her assumptions, but inside, a quiet shift took place. Not anger, clarity. She was speaking from a place of ignorance, and I wasn't about to hand her the truth on a silver platter, because the truth was simple. She had no idea what I'd been quietly building while everyone thought I was starting over from scratch. Living abroad was never about chasing an image. It was about building something with depth, even if nobody back home could see the pieces coming together. The first year was the hardest, adjusting to a culture where I knew no one and where every decision carried a price in both money and time, but those challenges forced me to adapt quickly. I learned the markets, studied the industries that had room for growth, and put in the kind of hours that blur days together. Family back home got the occasional photo, a dinner out, city skyline, but they never saw the 12-hour workdays or the months when I lived on a shoestring to funnel every spare cent into my ideas. During holiday calls, I'd give a polite summary. "Things are going well." That was enough for me. My cousin, in particular, never pressed for details. She was content with her own version of events, filling in the blanks with assumptions that suited her. The truth is, I've never been someone who announces every milestone. Not because I'm secretive, but because I believe results speak louder when they arrive fully formed. Broadcasting half-finished plans invites noise and opinions that add no real value. So I stayed quiet. And over the years, that quiet built something steady, skills sharpened, contacts gained, and the early framework of a business that could outlast trends. When I finally returned home, they saw only a closed chapter. I saw the foundation of something much larger, just not ready to be revealed. It happened midway through the afternoon, when the conversation had drifted from vacations to careers. My cousin leaned back in her chair, a glass of wine in hand, and with a smirk said, "Guess you finally realized the 9-to-5 life isn't so bad, now that you're back where you belong?" The comment was wrapped in a casual tone, almost playful, but it landed with precision. A few relatives chuckled politely, not sure whether to join in or avoid the awkwardness. Others exchanged quick, knowing glances, the kind that carry silent verdicts. In that split second, I could feel the weight of perception shifting, as if her words had given everyone permission to view my years abroad as some expensive misstep rather than a deliberate choice. I sat there, listening while memories surfaced. Years ago, when she was going through a messy breakup and whispers were spreading through the family, I had defended her without hesitation. When she changed careers twice in 3 years, I told anyone who questioned it that she was finding her path, that there was value in exploring different opportunities. I never thought about whether she'd repay that loyalty. It simply felt like the right thing to do. Now, here she was, casually reframing my return as failure. Not a single person corrected her. Nobody asked what I had actually been doing abroad or whether I had chosen to come back on my own terms. Her words became the truth in that room, and I could feel my credibility tightening into something smaller, more fragile. The realization hit quietly. This wasn't an offhand remark born from ignorance. It was deliberate. A positioning play. A way to anchor me in the minds of those listening, somewhere beneath her. And if I let it pass unchallenged, the story would harden, becoming the version they carried forward. That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about my pride. It was about protecting the integrity of what I'd built. Even if they couldn't see it yet, I didn't bite. Her words hung there, waiting for a reaction, but I gave her nothing. Instead, I let the conversation keep flowing, my attention turning to the people around the table. An uncle smirked but kept his eyes on his plate. One aunt let out a soft laugh before quickly looking down at her glass. Another relative changed the subject altogether, as though steering the room away from something mildly inappropriate. While the chatter moved on, my mind stayed with the moment. It wasn't just the remark, it was the tone, the calculated pause before the punchline, the way she looked at me just long enough to make sure everyone was paying attention. I found myself wondering whether she actually believed this version of my life or if she simply liked the position. It gave her the one where she was the success story and I was the example of what happens when you try something too bold. I kept my expression neutral, even faintly amused, as though her comment had slid right past me. But inside, I was cataloging every detail, who laughed, who didn't, and who avoided eye contact. These small reactions told me more than any follow-up conversation could. Patience has a way of unsettling people who expect you to defend yourself. And in that quiet, I'd already decided this wasn't going to be answered with a counterpunch. In the moment, it would be addressed in a way that left no room for interpretation, where the truth wouldn't need my voice to carry it, only the right timing on Monday morning. The work began with logins and spreadsheets, not speeches. Overseas accounts opened with 2-factor prompts, balances lining up exactly where they should. Quarterly statements for the holding company downloaded in order, revenue columns, operating costs, cash on hand, all the unglamorous proof. That effort had matured into structure. By midweek, the financials were organized into a single folder named for the current quarter. Sales invoices matched deposits. Vendor payouts aligned with contracts. Nothing flashy, just a rhythm that only appears after years of repetition. Each file received a short note. Date verified, source confirmed, cross, checked against the bank. The valuation report was the anchor. A friend from abroad, Tomas, who handled our books from the beginning, sent the finalized document for the last quarter with a simple message, signed and sealed. The numbers weren't astronomical, but they were clean. 2.1 million in annualized revenue, 18% net margin, steady quarter-over-quarter growth. It read like proof written in the language she never cared to learn. To ensure nothing could be dismissed as your own Excel. An auditor's letter was added to the bundle. Thomas coordinated the independent review months ago. Now the signature and registration number sat on the first page. When challenged, facts tend to carry their own oxygen. The report didn't need a speech. It needed an index. Real assets came next. Property deeds from overseas were pulled from secure storage and scanned. One small commercial unit purchased 3 years ago. A 2-bedroom flat bought off market during a dip. Titles listed my name, the purchase dates, and registry identifiers. Taxes were current, rental agreements up to date. No flourish. Just the quiet record of choices made when no one was watching. Investments were simpler to document, but just as important. Brokerage statements showed a mix of index funds and 2 early stakes in companies I believed in before they were fashionable. Dividend confirmations sat alongside trade histories. All of it was archived with the same discipline I'd used abroad. A picture emerged that looked nothing like starting over. It looked like someone who had learned to build, then kept building. Tomas stayed on the line across time zones to close any gaps. If anyone questions the valuation inputs, point them to Appendix C, he said, and keep the audit letter. First, people stop arguing when they see a professional signature. His advice was pragmatic, the way only someone who's seen numbers deflect noise can be. It helped to have a witness who knew the path from the first invoice to this report. Closer. To home, a different thread surfaced. An aunt reached out after Sunday lunch with a careful tone that gave her away before the words did. Your cousin's been telling people you're looking for help, she said, almost apologizing as she spoke. A cousin of a cousin forwarded. A screenshot later that night, a group chat where my supposed financial struggles were framed as common knowledge. That part wasn't ignorance. That was craft. The discovery changed the assignment. Clearing a misunderstanding requires patience. Countering a narrative requires precision. Screenshots were stored, timestamps noted, and the list of who had seen the claims was mapped against the calendar of recent gatherings. It wasn't about outrage. It was about topology, where the story had traveled, and who had carried it forward. Emotion tightened in the chest for a moment, then loosened under process. The folder now held more than financials. It held context. Bank statements, valuation, deeds, investments, audit letter, and the arc of a rumor designed to shrink me to a lesson. A second folder, for communication, began to form: polite updates, confirmations from overseas partners, and a concise summary Tomas drafted for third-party review on request. Verification got a final pass. Dates in the valuation aligned with deposit timestamps. Rental income matched lease terms. Tax receipts sat in sequence with the filings. If questioned, any page could be traced back to a ledger line, any claim, to a document that didn't need my voice to make it credible. The aim wasn't to burden people with numbers. It was to keep every number ready in case someone mistook silence for lack. One last check addressed optics, the very thing my cousin favored. Public modesty had been mistaken for emptiness, so any future clarification would be matter of fact. Not performative, no bragging graphs, no grand reveal. Just a measured explanation if asked, accompanied by whatever page answered the question cleanly. By the end of the month, the proof was complete and the picture was settled. She hadn't merely guessed wrong. She'd filled the room with a story that positioned me beneath her and invited others to stand on that version. The plan shifted accordingly, not to humiliate, not to trade jabs, but to let facts walk in. On their own feet at a moment of my choosing. Numbers don't defend ego. They defend history. What the folder contained, more than wealth, was time, the unphotographed nights, the risk weighed against rent, the patience to build without applause. If she wanted to narrate a failure, she'd have to do it in the presence of a record that refused to agree. That clarity steadied everything that followed. Words could be debated, documents could not. And when the day came to let the truth stand in the same room as her assumptions, it wouldn't be my volume that made the difference. It would be the calm weight of receipts that didn't need me. To speak for them, the invitation went out a week in advance. Casual wording, nothing that hinted at strategy. A midweek dinner, home-cooked, with a mix of familiar faces around the table. She was on the list, along with aunts, uncles, and 2 cousins who rarely turned down a free meal. The date wasn't random. It landed within days of a contract signing overseas that marked the best quarter my company had seen. Not that I intended to toast numbers. The milestone was simply the quiet current under everything I was about to set in place. In the days before, a small transfer landed in my local account, just a fraction of the quarter's profit, but enough that the balance, if casually mentioned, would counter the narrative she'd been tending. Not as a weapon, but as a fact that could stand on its own if it happened to surface. Money moves quietly if you know how to guide it. This one was meant to be more of a breeze than a gust. The other piece was the slideshow. Technically, it was for a new side project, a platform I'd been developing with partners abroad, tied to sustainable trade. The images were straightforward. Product shots, market events, a few behind-the-scenes glimpses of the work. Nestled among them were 2 or 3 slides with clean figures, revenue growth, partnership locations, and a photo from the signing ceremony just days earlier. Nothing flashy, nothing out of scale with the conversation. Just enough that if I pulled it up for feedback, it would be hard to miss what the past years had really looked like. Dinner prep carried its own kind of calm. The table was set, with enough care to make the evening feel intentional, but not staged. Platters within reach, lighting soft, background music low enough for conversation. I made sure the laptop sat on the sideboard, already open to the first slide. If anyone asked about the new project, and they always did when something was half mentioned, it would be effortless to angle the screen. No speech required. The aim wasn't to watch her squirm or to corner her in front of an audience. It was to shift the balance of what people thought they knew, without raising my voice or asking anyone to take sides. The setting would do the work: a shared meal, a simple update, a few well-placed truths visible to anyone who cared to notice. That's the part people misunderstand about control. It doesn't always come from talking louder or moving faster. Sometimes it's built in the pauses, in the spaces where others expect nothing to happen. By the time everyone left that night, I didn't need to guess which assumptions had been adjusted. It was in the tone of the goodbyes, the longer handshakes, the small shift in how questions were asked, and she left with less room to speak. On my behalf, not because I'd silenced her, but because the version of me she'd been describing no longer fit the facts on the table. Plates were still warm when the conversation made its predictable turn, the casual check-ins, the obligatory. "So what have you been up to?" That every family gathering seems to orbit around. I let a few others go first, listening as they shared promotions, new hobbies, minor household renovations. When it reached me, I leaned back, not with the posture of someone about to make an announcement, but with the ease of someone who simply had something to add. "I've just wrapped up a new partnership overseas," I said, almost in passing before reaching for the remote. The TV lit up with a clean slideshow, the same one I'd set on my laptop earlier. The first image was a handshake across a polished conference table, my signature alongside a foreign partner's on the contract. The next, an office shot from halfway across the world, team members in branded polos grinning at the camera. Then came the figures, modest in presentation, but impossible to mistake for anything but growth. No one in the room said anything at first, but I caught the shift. The easy smirk that had been fixed on her face for most of the evening tightened into something smaller, more calculated. She didn't lean in or tilt her head the way she usually did when readying a remark. Instead, she picked at her food, eyes flicking toward the TV and away again. The silence wasn't awkward, it was telling. Questions started coming, but not from her. An uncle wanted to know how the overseas market compared to here. An aunt asked how long I'd been building toward this deal. My younger cousin wanted to know if it meant more travel. Each answer was given without weight or flourish, just facts woven into the rhythm of the table. I didn't overplay the moment or let my tone sharpen. The numbers and images did the work for me. It was a quiet victory, not because I had cornered her, but because I hadn't needed to. She offered no challenge, no playful jab, no attempt to reclaim the floor. There was nothing she could say without contradicting what was plainly in front of everyone, and even she knew it. That restraint on her part, whether by choice or necessity, felt more final than any argument we could have had. What struck me most wasn't the satisfaction of winning, but the realization that I hadn't needed to fight on her terms at all. The truth had arrived in the room like a steady tide, shifting the ground beneath her without a single wave breaking. It didn't just alter her standing. It changed the way others looked at me. There was a new layer in their questions now. Less casual curiosity, more genuine interest. By the time dessert was served, the mood had shifted entirely. The conversation moved on to other topics, but the unspoken had already settled. I kept my smile easy, my tone warm, and never once referenced the things she'd said in the past. That omission, leaving the history untouched, was its own kind of statement. Walking into the evening, I'd prepared for the possibility of tension. Walking out, I carried something else entirely, confirmation that patience can be louder than confrontation, and that silence, in the right moment, says far more than defense ever could. About 4 months later, the tone around me at family gatherings had shifted in a way that didn't need pointing out. Conversations that used to skirt around my time abroad now leaned into it. Questions about the markets I worked in, the projects I was still managing, even casual curiosity about travel plans. The subtle edge in their curiosity was gone. What remained was interest and, in some cases, respect. No one brought up the night of that dinner, but I could feel how it had rewritten the script. My return was no longer framed as a retreat. Instead, it was seen for what it had always been, a continuation of something I'd built elsewhere, carried with me, and kept alive on my own terms. The story they now told about me was closer to the truth, not because I'd argued for it, but because I'd given them a reason to adjust. It themselves. My cousin still came to gatherings, her same practice, charm in place, and we exchanged the usual pleasantries. But the topic of my starting over never surfaced again. She hadn't apologized, and I hadn't expected her to. Some dynamics shift quietly, not with confessions, but with the simple disappearance of old narratives. What I valued most wasn't. The perception change, though I won't deny it was satisfying, but the way I'd managed it. I hadn't needed to humiliate her, corner her, or replay her words for an audience. My silence had been deliberate, my preparation steady, and when the moment came, the truth stood on its own. Looking back, I realized how often people rush to defend themselves at the first sign of doubt, when sometimes the more effective move is to let the doubt breathe, and then replace it with proof that can't be argued with. People will fill silence with whatever serves them, but when that silence is backed by preparation, it can turn into a mirror they can't look away from. In the end, I kept my dignity intact, my work untouched, and my story mine. That was the real win if you've ever had someone misjudge you, and you chose to let the truth surface instead of forcing it. I'd like to hear how it played out for you. Sometimes those are the stories worth sharing.